You're listening to the Yeshiva of Newark at IDT podcast. I'm your host and curator, Rabbi Avraham Kivlevitz, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Hi. This episode of the Projectionist has Semicha suffered from the difficulty of having Yitzchak speak as he was driving, making his way to his home in upstate New York. And the quality of the recording is poor, I will say that. However, the content, what he's talking about, his enthusiasm and his description of the significance of the film, Forbidden Planet, I think is worthwhile. And instead of jettisoning it and asking him to re-record, I beg your indulgence to push through. I think it's still intelligible what it is that he's saying. He's talking about this 1956 classic and how he rediscovered it and how he was able, as a mature person, to find depth and meaning from it. So I apologize for the technical problems. Hopefully those things won't dog us in the future. But I think it's still worthwhile hanging on and waiting for the second part of the program, especially when I hold forth on ET, which I think is worth your listen. Enjoy. Has Semicha. Hi, I'm with Kolakowski. Yitzchak's on the road, making his way home. I'm sitting here in my living room, but we're thinking about the uncharted territories, the planets themselves, way beyond the confines of New Jersey and New York, out in the Milky Way galaxy and beyond. I think it's, we're talking about science fiction films, and tonight, and of course that's a state, people are talking about, of course, of Disney's Lightyear, which is underperforming in the box office. And maybe some of it has to do with oversaturation of the Toy Story franchise, but it is a science fiction story, which I'm actually interested in. Actually, I think it has to do with that Tim Allen is not doing voice. Yeah, I think there was a reason why. I think there's a reason why Tim Allen's not doing the voice. He might be too old to do it, and also I think the chap, he's been canceled. The same reason. You might be correct. You might be the same thing that's caused Disney to insert a same-sex kiss in Lightyear might be the reason why Tim Allen wasn't considered appropriate for the voice of Lightyear. I think one of the things that they tried to indicate was that this is the movie that in the Toy Story world, the toy was supposed to be a franchise, a toy of. And therefore, They could tell us science fiction. What I'm trying to say, is that the science fiction genre is alive. It's, again, even the newest Pixar offering is basically what we would call a staple of science fiction. From what I've read, it's about a team of explorers who are going out to some planet to go to discover something, etc. And so this is something which, I guess even from Menz's film, to the moon, right? What is it called again? A Trip to the Moon, which is like one of the earliest silent films. One of the earliest silent films that we've had, the idea of transporting human beings beyond and thinking about how we would interact out there and using it as a metaphor, like Star Trek did so famously to social issues here on, in this planet. So science fiction is clearly, it's not a genre like the Western that you scratch your head at, that you have to, you have to constantly reinvent. It seems like it's consistently, as all the Star Trek iterations, even now on CBS, is on other streaming services. So this is a genre that we've talked about is alive and well.
I mean, this week I'm going to Monster Bash in Pittsburgh, and one of the most exciting things whenever we go there is not only to meet the actors or actresses who are in the movies or their children sometimes about, but also to see the original props that were used in the movies. And both of the movies that we're going to speak about tonight, I've been able to encounter those props at Monster Bash. Actually, from both of these movies, they bring them out. I've had pictures of them. I have videos on my YouTube channel with the props from both of these movies.
I agree. Especially, listen, if you're a film aficionado and there's more to the movie than losing yourself, you want to know how the magic was done. You want to see, you're right. The props are crucial to you because it underscores how brilliant the directors and the filmmakers were in terms of being successful in bringing you there. Especially when you can touch them and feel them and realize how they aren't. This is not, a laser beam. This is not necessarily. Here's the transporter room. Here's the actual animatronic being that was Rabbi the robot or whatever. So this is I agree with you. It takes a certain amount of love to want to actually own and be connected to those original details. It's got to be 40 years old. So I've been waiting to mid-June of 2022 to talk about this film because I remember when it came out. So the film I want to talk about, I'm going to leave as our second part. Why don't you talk about the film that you want to speak about? Go ahead.
I think the common denominator I feel about both of these films is that these are iconic films. They're highbrow films, and also they're a little bit. For me, I usually like the more schlocky, lowbrow fare, and these are both two very highbrow films that I even find to be somewhat too much for me. It could be dramatic, could be pretentious, but I recently gave Forbidden Planet a second chance. I'd seen it a few times. I remember taping it off of TNT Monster Vision or something along those lines in the 1990s. And then it was actually at those times they would have different popular actors come out and host the Monster Vision show on TNT. And it was LeVar Burton from Star Trek The Next Generation, arguably better Reading Rainbow, who was hosting the movie that he wanted to present was Forbidden Planet. And then I purchased on DVD and I watched it again. And then this weekend on Spenguli, we were able to, record and watch the Spenguli show was also Forbidden Planet. And I actually sat down and watched the movie, which I hadn't seen in a number of years. And everybody who's familiar with this film from 1956 knows, how brilliant it is, how iconic it is, especially like you mentioned before, Robbie the Robot is an iconic figure that comes out of this movie and then is used.
So why don't you give a little synopsis of what is this? Again, the film is well known. What's the basic synopsis of Forbidden Planet?
The highbrow aspects of it. First of all, it's an adaptation of Shakespeare's The Tempest. That's the first part that makes it very highbrow. The second thing is how it focuses on where I remember, I used to search through the TV guide or the paper version of the TV guide for which science fiction and monster movies are going to be shown. And the planet was always described as being very Freudian because here's the monster from the id that Freud discussed the idea of the ego and the id, and the ego and the superego. And so the monster comes from the id. So basically, the first thing that's just that stands out about this film, even compared to other films of the 50s that were, again, highbrow science fiction, like The Day the Earth Stood Still. We see The Day the Earth Stood Still starts off with Michael Rennie's character Klaatu, spoken about early on in the podcast, where this alien is coming, landing his flying saucer in Washington, D.C. Here, we see it also a flying saucer, but it's not one of theirs. Theirs still they ask, is it one of theirs or one of ours? Here in Forbidden Planet is one of ours. They get a few things wrong. How were they supposed to know? They predicted that the first man wouldn't land on the moon until the end of the 21st century. So unless they're going with the conspiracy theories that we didn't go to the moon, which are kind of silly.
I get it. So basically, they are sent to this.
They're sending this flying saucer to this other planet, Altair Delta, I think, or Altair 4, to go as a reconnaissance mission to rescue the last survivors of a mission that had been sent there some 20 years earlier. And as far as they knew, there was maybe only one or two survivors left from this voyage to this planet. And Leslie Nielsen is the commander of the ship, but he was still a serious.
I think it's almost impossible, considering his success and his really equating himself with the figure in Police Story, in all those police films that he made, The Naked Gun. It's almost impossible to see him in his serious roles.
He looks very different too. I mean, obviously he was much younger, but it was the same person. In comedic roles, he always had very wide-eyed and almost cartoonish looking, and so. But indeed, it's the same Leslie Nielsen. It's not Leslie Nielsen for the planet. And when they're approaching this planet, they make radio contact with the survivor there on the planet, who's played by Walter Pigeon, who of course had a very illustrious and dignified film career. And he's telling them, don't come here. I can't. He's not telling them, I'm not going to allow you to come here, but he's telling them, if you come here, I can't be held responsible for what might happen to you or your group. And that's kind of giving away the gun in the first in the first.
I understand act. That's showing the gun in the first act that something terrible will happen. Some monstrous thing will be unleashed.
But that he is responsible for it, and even though he's trying to bear no responsibility for it, he comes to the realization that the monster that is attacking the people, this invisible monster, is actually coming. It's the monster from the id, as we said before, and it's coming, which is level of the subconscious mind, but it's coming from this Walter Pigeon's character, his own id. It is his own base animal, kind of like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, where they're existing in the same body, but in different roles at different times. Here, the kind of the Mr. Hyde that Stevenson was talking about, that's hidden within a person, that was hiding inside the person, actually becomes separate from Walter Pigeon's character and is manifested as this invisible monster that at certain points they have some methods to make it visible, and they're trying to fight it, and they can't do it. And ultimately, that's his own end. I don't want to give away the whole movie, but that's basically the whole trajectory of the film, is to find out that the monster is coming from him. It's coming from his own subconscious. And I think one of the most poignant scenes in the film is where Leslie Nielsen explains to this audience, I think is his name, that every human being has this Yetzer Hara within him, has this monster within him, within the id, and that's why we have laws and religion to make us to domesticate us. And it's fascinating that here you have they wanted to see how brilliant this movie was. The TV guy would like to point that out for Monster for the Inn. But Leslie Nielsen is pointing out that the cure for the id is more of a Jungian cure of how Jung wrote about the psychology of religion, which was something that Freud, for the most part, rejected. He wasn't interested that much, but he wrote near the end of his life a very strange book about Moses and monotheism that it has a lot of this very quirky and not typical book from his ideology, and also just a strange book as opposed to Jung. When they asked Jung, do you believe in God? He said, I don't believe. I know there's a God. He was a person who was intensely interested in religion and actually had a great deal of interest in Kabbalah and Hasidus, even though he himself wasn't Jewish. Freud was of the Jewish extraction, and Jung was not. But Jung, wrote that the Maggid of Mezrich, was typhus already. Psychology of Jung, and really that's a very Jungian response to say that that's how we are domesticated as human beings, through religion and laws, through these archetypes that bring us away from the monster that's lurking in our id. And again, all of this sounds very pretentious. We're used to, Rabbi the Robot. The next year was in a movie, The Invisible Boy, which was, for children, much more simple movie, much more, even though it was, was still the same science fiction type of thing, but totally different type of approach as opposed to this very, very hybrid. But I realized the pacing doesn't make it as pretentious as I thought it was. I think one of the things that ruined it for me when I was younger was that version that was shown on TNT was widescreen letterbox being shown on a regular square TV. Now we have our widescreen TV, so the TV was all full of this movie as opposed to when I was a kid. You were fitting a very long rectangle in the square television, and you weren't really able to see, because we wanted to not miss anything that's on the side. We wound up with these black boxes, letterboxing on top of the bottom of the screen that really kind of ruined it for me as a child, and a few other movies I remember on Sci-Fi Channel that I was really looking forward to seeing, and I felt they were ruined by letterbox, and now I'm able to see them because they weren't very easy to find when I was younger, and now have them on DVD and they're streaming everywhere. And so it's a very different type of
watching it, I guess, a number of years ago. And the beginning is so plodding that it's very difficult to, the acting is so wooded in the beginning that you really, it's, I think our listeners need to be told it's worth the wait, because it really does. The setup is quite talky, and I guess what's the word I'm looking for? There's a lot of exposition in the beginning before you get to the heart of the matter about what's really going on.
It's while that is true, on the other hand, it is also very visually stunning. So
I understand.
A lot of movies, especially in black and white, even though I always prefer black and white movies myself. This movie is just it has those visuals that they, especially nowadays, we're so used to the special effects that it doesn't, we're not spoiled from it. But in 1956, these special effects were groundbreaking. They were.
I understand. I think part of what the film, and you mentioned it before, was the fact that the species that have died. In other words, we've talked about on this program about the cheekiness and the kitschiness and of the aliens and what they look like with big eyes or lizard faces. Here, you actually don't see the aliens. They actually have, the aliens have actually died. They are a civilization.
What they say, 200 centuries.
200 centuries ago, but the Krell, that species that had lived there, Dr. Morbius has really tapped into their discoveries, and even though they were a superior species, they fell, and they destroyed themselves because as they were trying to advance their own minds and using scientific technique to push the boundaries of intelligence to turn ourselves into beings that could do anything, there was this other part of ourselves, as you said, the id, that was also unleashed, that was unleashed in a way almost proportionately in a way that was monstrous. I think this is, like you say, the Krell aren't there, but it's a warning, really, in the 1950s, the mid-1950s, as computer technology was beginning, other advancements in space and science, sort of a similar, using Shakespeare, but almost a similar, and I think less preachy way than The Day the Earth Stood Still. You know, The Day the Earth Stood Still, when you have, the speech of Klaatu at the end about, hey, what are you doing with your nuclear wars, your nuclear weapons? You're going to destroy yourself and you're going to destroy others. Here, it was actually, what is scientific advancement doing to us? Which is a similar theme that Kubrick explored in 2001. So I think there is a...
what we're seeing now with the advancements in artificial intelligence, we're crossing over some very scary borders right now. And are we, it's a bit different than what's presented in this film.
Right. And like you say, I think it's interesting that what has survived of the film, is, you want to see Leslie Nielsen serious? Do you want to see Rabbi the robot? And I think you're right. The real import of the film, I think, has been lost. I think that's one of the reasons why it's, like you say, it's probably worth a view again. Part of what, you talk about Walter Pidgeon. I remember Walter Pidgeon from his films in the 40s, of course, where, he was a leading man. He was in Mrs. Miniver and some other films that were Academy Award films. They're very important. I think Walter Pidgeon, we talked about Cary Grant in the past. It's hard to get old and to be able to embody a character in an important way when you're not the leading man, when you're too old, and I think that's maybe, I don't know, perhaps Walter Pidgeon was a good actor, but I think that was maybe one of the reasons that that he was limited in the later part of his career as well. What could he play? What roles could he play that he could fill and be satisfied with? This might have been his swan song, right? In terms of his great roles.
He was in the film version of Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, which was about 5 years later. So he's still, but this is probably his last really major role. One thing, before we paused for a minute, I was mentioning the props from the movie that Mr. Schenk had brought to show us at Monster Bash. He had one of the 3 flying saucer models that were used in that film, and also some of the guns and some of the outfits, some of the uniforms. And he showed it to us at Monster Bash a number of years ago before he passed away. I'd seen it, I think it was in 2015, 2016, that I remember him bringing these items to the show. And he gave a whole lecture about how these same props were used time and time again in so many different movies. Not only, I believe this movie is from MGM, but the various studios even would share the same props that Columbia and Universal. They would all have access to these same props that were made originally in 1956 for Forbidden Planet, and then they would be used by the Three Stooges. They'd be used and the Man from U.N.C.L.E. They'd be used in the Twilight Zone. They'd be used in various movies. Zsa Zsa Gabor, Outer Space, and the same props were used time and time again. And
well, yes, I know this is a favorite topic of yours about the recycling of props and recycling of stock footage. I know that this is something that you enjoy in terms of
have Rabbi the robot, but Rabbi the robot was used, playing various roles all throughout. Again, also showed up in the Twilight Zone, showed up in Lost in Space, similar to the other the same man who made the robot from Lost in Space. Also, the same
I think there was a Lost in Space episode where that robot met Rabbi. I think so. I think there was also just to talk about Walter Pidgeon again, most of the roles after Forbidden Planet, he played some sort of senator, some sort of admiral, usually in some sort of minor role because he had a presence and because he had a voice. I think one of his, he played Ziegfeld in Funny Girl. He played a senator in Advise and Consent, and a film that I remember watching on television when it came out in 1965 with Leslie Ann Warren, Cinderella. He was the king. I remember that film. I was watching it when it was live in 1965, watching it in black and white on our little tiny television down in Memphis. So Walter Pidgeon did have some sort of continuance, but I do think this might have been the greatest, the last great film role that he had, especially in terms of how important he was to the plot. And it's clearly worth seeing again. E.T., there's been a lot of retrospectives about E.T. Spielberg himself, 20 years later, issued a version of E.T. that he had enhanced some of the special effects. One of the things that happened 20 years later was it was sort of a politically correct version of E.T. The police that are chasing the boys on the bicycles through the magic of photoshopping the film, they aren't carrying guns, they're carrying walkie-talkies. They added another 6 minutes based on, I guess, some footage that Spielberg had initially rejected. It's interesting, though, that when the Laserdisc came out and Spielberg actually, that was the last time you could actually see the 2002 version of the film. It's out of circulation now. It's almost impossible to see. Spielberg regretted the upgrades in the film that he had made. It's almost like Spielberg understood that there's a certain magic and power to what you produce. And obviously history and technology is going to come later and alter things. But if you're going to go back to that original and alter it continuously, then the testament to the time is not true. And I applaud Spielberg for actually withdrawing his updated version of E.T. My point, though, however, is that E.T. is a film, and I think even more than Forbidden Planet, which I guess might be a lost gem, E.T., I think, has continuously been loved for 40 years. It's a film that at one point was rejected by the initial studio, Columbia, I believe, but when Universal decided to put it out, it became the greatest grossing film till Jurassic Park. You viewed Forbidden Planet recently, and I try to be, when I talk about these films, to at least have seen them within the last month or so, to at least know what I'm talking about. I have not seen E.T. in years. I would say 10 years. But I can talk about it as if it's as fresh and real, because I think it is a film that not only has an incredible idea behind it, but is executed so perfectly that it stays with you. I think it is Spielberg's greatest achievement, and that is saying a lot. Spielberg is whatever his detractors want to say about the most recent film that he made, which was the remake of West Side Story. Spielberg is one of the most gifted filmmakers Hollywood has ever seen. And I would say a proudly Jewish one as well. I'm not so happy. Again, I have not seen from beginning to end Schindler's List. And that's really because I have a hard time watching Holocaust films because of where I come from and because of my background and because of my history. But I have seen most of Spielberg's films. And he has contributed in ways, as much as Martin Scorsese and Francis Ford Coppola might be in some ways greater intellectual artists, Spielberg, I think, can take his place with them as one of the most influential filmmakers of the 20th century. And people who, as you've told me before, when I told you I want to talk about E.T., everybody has cannibalized E.T. I think you said that you'd rather watch Mac and Me than E.T., which is, of course, a knockoff of
very cheap, funny, kind of funny. I mean, the thing with E.T. was so traumatic for me, like you mentioned, that they replaced the guns with walkie-talkies, and at one time I remember seeing it it was a very traumatic experience when they tried to end.
Well,
that was something that Spielberg was trying to capture. I'm going to lose reception soon.
Spielberg is, again, the film is really, and I think this is why it's different than Lightyear that we talked about in the beginning, or Forbidden Planet. It really, in my mind,
that would be though, and it also has the product placement.
Yeah, I don't see it as a science fiction film. There are beautiful images of the spaceship. Spielberg enhanced them for the 2002 edition. The aliens, of course, they worked very hard on how to make E.T. look, to give him enough of a humanoid feature. Of course, his hands, in particular, the almost godlike fingers and his powers. But it really is about a child. It's about a child in a family where the family is being torn apart through divorce. Spielberg's history was of a person who his family was torn apart. Spielberg is Elliot in so many ways. In some ways, he's also like Michael, Elliot's brother. But this is Spielberg's story. And I think it's out of California, a place that Spielberg grew up in, and I think therefore it really is his most personal work, because his connection to Judaism and to the Holocaust was laudatory and important. But this is the story of a person finding within himself strength, even in difficult times. A person who doesn't have a father, who has to come to terms with living only with his mom and finding some sort of intellectual, emotional core that is able to allow him to survive. And that is really what happens here with Elliot. E.T., of course, I don't have to really tell anybody that E.T. is a castaway. He misses the boat. His planet has the beings, the ET beings, have landed on the planet and are. That's the way the film begins. It's in the forest, of course, there, and all of these beings, you don't see them because Spielberg wanted, just like the shark in Jaws. Spielberg wants the audience to wait, to anticipate, to think about when is he going to show up. But it's clear, although you don't see his face, that he has missed the boat, and now he is stuck in the garage somewhere or in of the suburban place where Elliot lives with his family. And when Elliot discovers E.T., he now is going to, it changes his life, because not only is this something special for him, something that's uniquely his, something that belongs to him, but this is something where he's able to, by connecting to this being that he shares this emotional bond with, a being that gives him first of all, allows him to care for someone else, to grow up, to not just be a person who is being cared for, but to care for someone, to recognize the plight in someone else. The emotions of other beings that he's with allow Spielberg to not only comment on the state of what was going on in America at that time. E.T. becomes sentient in terms of understanding our world, English, and specifically the American environment, by watching television. And one of the greatest scenes in E.T., of course, is where E.T. has already bonded with Elliot. He's connected with him, and therefore he spends a day watching TV, daytime TV, and actually being moved and changed by films that he's watching. E.T. sees the raw emotion, the power of films, just like Spielberg as a little boy discovered the power of films. And as E.T. is watching these films and also cracking open a six-pack from the refrigerator, Elliot is doing a science experiment. And once again, Elliot now, through E.T., is able to care about more than just himself. He's able to care even about the frog that he's dissecting. And as it's a great shot as Spielberg moves between Elliot's revolution in the science lab and E.T. getting drunk and inspired by Hollywood at home, and Elliot jumping on a chair and kissing, that Elliot grabs and kisses while E.T. is watching, I think, John Ford's The Quiet Man, or John Wayne kissing Maureen O'Hara, I believe. So it's just, and of course, I think the film is fantastic in terms of melding the story with the music. John Williams' score is so perfect. Spielberg, in fact, reshot certain scenes in order to match the score. Again, you can't help if just hearing the strands of music from E.T. can bring back so much of the film. The chase scene of of course Keyes, as he's known, Peter Coyote, the scientist who realizes E.T. has landed and is trying to discover him. As he and his team are chasing the boys, Elliot and his brother's friends on bicycles. Elliot, of course, first, and then all the boys themselves are able, through E.T.'s magic, E.T.'s ability as telekinesis, to actually fly in the air. And that moment where John Williams' score takes off and the bicycles fly, again, it's really one of, I think, the magical moments in cinematic history. A simple, and again, the plot is relatively simple. Alien stranded on planet. Boy takes an alien. Boy tries to shield alien. The government tries to find alien. Alien dies. And many people have seen it as a Christ metaphor. Spielberg denied the connection. He says, "Oh, come on, my mother owns a Jewish restaurant. There's no way I would be able to do a film that's about Jesus." But I do think that Jesus is part of this film as well. Part of what Yitzchak, you said yourself, you found it difficult to watch E.T. die. As E.T. is placed in this coffin, and Elliot is able to express his love. He's able to do something which he hasn't been able to do towards his mother and towards his brother and sister. He's able to talk about how much this meeting meant and how much he misses this person. And he's able, adult-like, to express love, not like, I just love ice cream. This is a friendship of love, a love of friendship that is an indicator of a real maturity of a human being. Of course, again, Spielberg really takes out every emotional cue, because as the coffin is closed, E.T. has been able, with his brilliance from the planet that he comes from, been able to construct from Elliot's toys. He's able to construct a communication device that is able to summon his spaceship back. Of course, that was the tagline: "E.T. phone home, E.T. phone home." The commercial, again, another, AT&T enjoyed getting a little product placement along with Reese's Pieces, which of course was, the M&Ms didn't want to use their, they didn't want to use their candy. Reese's Pieces had a big jump, but so did the AT&T at that point. And the idea of ET phoning home, as he's closing the coffin, you can see that E.T. is indeed, although he seems to have shriveled, you can see just the very beginning of a little beat, a little light that emanates from the window in that coffin that they're closing him in on. And you realize that E.T. is indeed alive, that death is not complete, the idea that we don't die and that's the end of things. There's still an eternal aspect that's inside of ourselves. And this, of course, might be a Christian idea. Yitzchak, both you and I know that this is something that we believe in as well. Jews do believe in the afterlife. We do believe that the soul is eternal. We believe that there's something within us that exhibits itself that can't be destroyed. And that's part of what happens.
He is a mason of the goof also, which we also see here.
That's right. And E.T. does come back. And, I can't look, if there's a cynic out there that has a dry eye when E.T. comes back to life, you need some therapy. You know what I'm saying? Because that is such an uplifting moment when you can realize that, yes, that there is life beyond, and especially a being like ET, who is just an explorer. He is the embodiment of curiosity and goodness, which is part of the magic muse that Spielberg was able to imbibe within himself to really become the filmmaker and artist that he became. So I think one of the great things about ET, and I could really talk about it for 5 shows, is that even in and I'm going to talk a little bit about Drew Barrymore in a minute, but the climactic scene of where ET, the spaceship lands, and of course now the government with all their plans and anything that they want is completely squashed, similar to Spielberg's other real science fiction film that he made a couple of years earlier, Close Encounters of the Third Kind. That's a film that should go with Forbidden Planet and Lightyear as a film about meeting people from another world and what that means, and what it will mean when we will meet. What does it mean for society when we will make those advancements? That's not what ET is about. But there is that scene when the spaceship lands, and that, of course, ends any conversation, because any sort of scientific desire to get ET is squashed at that moment. Because at that moment, you have these beings from another world. And ET, enters the ship. He waddles into the ship. Again, we haven't talked about all the little people that helped, besides the animatronic device, the little people and the puppetry that helped bring ET to life at the time. But it was really the script and the idea that made you accept that illusion. But as ET waddles up into the ship, of course, the dog runs into the ship as well. And ET, Elliot, before that moment, he asks Elliot to come with him. That will he go? Maybe Elliot, can go with ET and leave. And Elliot says he can't. Elliot says stay. He wants ET to stay, but of course he knows ET can't. ET will die if he stays. But Elliot can live with ET and maybe live a world beyond. Maybe you could actually live in the Ilma Emes, live and of course this is something where we're still grounded here. And Elliot says the most mature thing. He, despite the fact what imagination and these faculties that have been unleashed can do, he needs to live within this world with his parents, with his mother, and make the best he can do to connect to his father if he can. He has to stay. And what is it that ET says to him? He says, be good. Yes, you can still go into this world of art. You can go to this world of creation, this world of beauty, this world that the movies and literature and other things allow us to escape to. But ultimately, we need to be good. We need to take that world that we can construct and live in and thrive in and fly in and be good here, which is part of what ET tells him. But that's what he says. And again, I tear up thinking about it. Again, I haven't seen the film in about 10, 15 years. I'll be right here, he says. ET is going, but then ET, using his finger, puts the finger onto Elliot's head and says, I'll be right here. Because this is where we are able to use our mind, and we're able to draw from it the memories and of people that we've seen, of accomplishments that we've had. And we're able to use that internal power that you talked about before in Forbidden Planet, the id, those other elements that became so monstrous on that planet. And we can actually marshal those. We can marshal those, and we can use the best part of ourselves to help ourselves and the world. And that's part of what the message of ET is. I think also the greatness of the film is embodied by the fact that when ET goes into space, of course, with John Williams' score rising to a crescendo, a great rainbow is formed. A rainbow is formed. Again, the symbol of God's pleasure with the world. The world can survive. And The last shot is not of space. This is not a space film. The last shot is Elliot watching. It's an extreme close-up of Elliot's face, and maybe he's not even watching the ship anymore. He is processing, and that's where the film ends. It doesn't end in the stars. It ends with the close-up on the boy, and I think that really, in a simple term, tells you what the story of the film is. Before we close here, I just want to mention, of course, the other parts of E.T. that it did, of course, not only introduce Henry Thomas. Again, we talked about Henry Thomas's career. I talked about him a couple of weeks ago when we talked about Raggedy Man. He is not a particularly gifted child actor. You're not going to compare him to Freddie Bartholomew or Mickey Rooney or anything like that. But he's done workman-like jobs in other films. But again, this is obviously his greatest film, and the film that he was able to be a typical American kid. And it's a testament to Spielberg that he was able to get this type of performance out of him, even in the cursing and things that he used. He wasn't Freddie Bartholomew was like a miniature Olivier, and this is just a typical American suburban kid out of California. And I think that's what Spielberg wanted. In terms of Drew Barrymore, who obviously is Hollywood royalty, she of course has made a career after this, playing all different types of roles, juvenile roles, and then teenage roles. Many of them extremely not the type of fare that we would ever recommend. I guess ending in Charlie's Angels and some other films that she was making. If Drew Barrymore, she was only, she plays, an important role because, E.T. is a little doll for her. And as a 3-year-old, she's a 3 or 4-year-old. She's very happy to have this little being around that she could do dress up with and, could even interact with. So again, Drew Barrymore is obviously a little gifted child actress here. I'm not sure if she went on to, I guess, bigger things. I don't think she ever made anything better than this. Obviously there might have been any little girls that could play that role, but I think that for Drew Barrymore and for the Barrymores, if we look at them Hollywood royalty, I think again, this film would probably be the film that she probably, if it made it, it definitely propelled her in some way. She had she was the star of I didn't see it, but I read the book Firestarter, which was based on a Stephen King book that she was in. But it's interesting. The other, again, Peter Coyote and the others, Dee Wallace, none of them really are any major stars, and I think that's really another testament to the film. The film works because of what it is. The people involved are really incidental. We've talked about Cary Grant, we've talked about Bette Davis, we've talked about other incredible actors and actresses. So in that way, Bogart, Spencer Tracy, E.T. doesn't have any of that. It doesn't have really any great performances. But what it does have is really a story that has an incredible universal appeal. I think I'll end tonight with a little personal anecdote about E.T. We had a neighbor that we were very close to in our home in Chicago. It was a young couple, and they were we became very friendly with them. My children were young, and my youngest child was born on a Shabbos. My 2 last children born on a Shabbos, and I remember we were thinking that maybe the baby was going to be born on Shabbos. So I went next door to this couple. They were not Jewish, who we'd been friendly with, and I said, we might need you because something might happen. And sure enough, on the early Shabbos morning, I knocked on their door, and they were ready. And they drove my station wagon to the hospital for my youngest child to be born. And it was soon after that they had been part of this ride, because the baby was almost born in the car, that I saw my neighbor crying, and I didn't know what it was, but it turned out that they had been involved in helping us deliver a healthy baby, and she had just had a miscarriage. And she broke down in front of me and she said, we really wanted to give a little brother to their son Joe. And I didn't know, obviously, I didn't know how to comfort her, but I said, I've got this DVD at home of, it wasn't a DVD, it was a VHS. I have a VHS of E.T. Maybe you'd like to watch it. And I went and got her the VHS of E.T. And she returned it back to me a day later and said how much it meant that she was able to, forget about her pain and to see this film. And it really propelled her into a good place. So, the world is difficult, as Elliot knows, and we deal with pain and disappointment. And I think that a film that is able to be a salve and a balm for people going through all different types of pain and difficulty in the most simple linear story. Spielberg filmed the film. Yitzhak, that of course you're a filmmaking geek. That most films are storyboarded, and many times they'll film the most difficult scene earlier, especially if there's a problem of the actor only being available at a certain time or being able to get that location. Spielberg wanted E.T. to be filmed very much chronologically. From the beginning, he wanted the spontaneity of the children. He wanted them to really care and be worried about what was going on. And I think that really, despite the difficulty of filming in such a way, and sticking, to the chronological aspect of the script instead of filming stuff out of order and then putting them together, I think that shows in the power that the film has in terms of actually being drawn up by the story, the excitement, what you discover, even again the mother's performance. And I think that's part of the reason why it can be this
TV. I'm trying to think how old I would have been when I saw it, but I probably should give it a second chance. That's
well, it is going to be shown again in August, a giant IMAX release on its 40th. And there aren't that many films that merit that. There aren't that many films, whether it's The Wizard of Oz or Gone with the Wind. I think Spielberg knows that. Jaws doesn't have that, and neither does Jurassic Park or Schindler's List. I think I think it corroborates what most people say: write what you know, film what you know, and this is really what he knew. This is really what he was, and I think because of that, I don't need his sanctimonious discussion of the Arab-Israeli conflict in Munich. I don't need him to teach me about the horrors of the Holocaust. Although I think it's beneficial to the Gentile world that there is such a film as Schindler's List. But I think E.T. is able to cross those type of boundaries. I think it's able in many ways to, just like it gave a little bit of a salve to Carla, my next door neighbor. I think it really can hit people on all ages. It really is so unique in a way. You mentioned Christopher Lloyd in our earlier discussion. Christopher Lloyd starred in, of course, Taxi as Jimmy Natowski. I don't know if he won the Emmy for his portrayal there, but of course that's what propelled him to his role as Doc Brown in Back to the Future. And there is one of the Taxi episodes that's really built on E.T. The whole episode is Jim trying to get the cabbies in the Sunshine Cab Company to go watch E.T. And although they all dismiss it as some sort of children's film, Jim knows that it has a power. He's Reverend Jim. He's someone who has, through drugs, he's attained a spiritual sense of things. And it's incredible that you have a sitcom that was built, by James Brooks, who was the executive producer of Taxi. The whole sitcom episode, whatever it is, 24 minutes, whatever, 25 minutes, is really built on heralding and trying to encourage the viewers who are watching TV to go see E.T. the movie. I think it's incredible, right? It was you can look this up. The whole Taxi episode was really a homa. It was like a paean to people. Go see E.T. We want you to be watching Taxi and buying Kleenex from the commercials, but we really believe what's even greater than our television roles is to see this movie. So I think and Christopher Lloyd is the mouthpiece for that idea, and I think that's something that really shows you that people knew, even in Hollywood, this was something different. This was something beyond, and it was something that I think will test the time. Well, watch your step on the way out. Don't hit any cows. We'll take you. Take everybody. We'll see you.
Thanks for joining us for another episode from the Yeshiva of Newark at IDT Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app so you don't miss a single episode.